Hi, in today's tutorial we're going to be looking at exporting web-ready images from Zbrush. So I'm going to use a demo project from Zbrush to explain this process. So if you open up Lightbox and make sure you're in the project folder, and we're going to be using this demo soldier project. So we just double click that to launch it. And the first thing we're going to want to do is to make sure that our scene is set up for exporting. Now, this demo project is a nice one to use as an example because it has multiple subtools, and so that will allow us to apply different materials to each subtool. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that I've got some nice topology to work with. So I'm just going to go to each subtool and divide it by pressing Ctrl D to make sure I've got a nice smooth surface. Okay, so you're going to just drop into each subtool and Ctrl D to divide it once or twice to get a nice smooth surface. If you're working with your own project, hopefully all your subtools have nice topology, but if you're using this demo project to learn this process, just go through each subtool and divide it till you've got a nice smooth surface for each one. Just going onto the wristbands, the kneecaps, and the boots. Okay, so now I've got nice smooth topology. Now the next thing I want to do is just explain something which might be a little bit confusing when we're doing this process, and that is we've got move, scale, rotate up here, zoom and scroll over here, and zoom and move and rotate down here. Now, you might be fooled into thinking that these things kind of all do the same sort of action, but they're all different. So for the tutorial today, we're mostly going to be using the document zoom and scroll, and also our kind of view, move, zoom and rotate. We won't be using move, scale and rotate up here. These move, scale and rotate tools edit our subtools. So if we go onto those, we'd actually be moving and adjusting our subtools. At the point when you're going to be rendering and exporting, all your subtools should already be kind of positioned in the correct place, so we do not need to use those. So we just go back into draw mode. I'll explain the difference between these two sets of navigation tools. This one, if I hover over zoom and drag in and out, is affecting how zoomed in we are on our bounding box, so our actual document size. And if we use, for example, zoom down here, we're actually zooming in and out of our scene. Okay, so this one is adjusting our bounding box view, and this one's actually adjusting our view within the scene. Okay, so we'll be making use of both of these sets of navigation tools throughout this process. So the first thing I want to do is to set my background color, and to do that I go up to Document and I go down to this background button. If I click that, it will change my background color to whatever I have selected with my color picker. So if I wanted to change that, I hit my main color button. I set the color by clicking the outside box, so that selects your color, and then the inside box sets your saturation. Okay, so if I wanted to change that background color, I would pick a color here, go Document, Background, and it will change it. If you're going to be exporting from Zbrush and uploading it straight onto your website, you might want to pick a color that complements the color range on your website. If, for example, you're going to be opening these images in Photoshop to manipulate them further, you probably want to choose a kind of sort of basic color, for example, white, black or gray, in order to make best use of the lasso tool easily to be able to select the background. So in this case, I'm going to be using white for my background. So just again, selecting white, document, background, and we've got our background color set. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is set our document size, and that's the resolution that our image will export at when we come to pulling it out of ZBrush. So to do that, we go into the document menu, and down here we have our document resolution. We can adjust that by simply clicking and typing in our pixel resolution that we want. For most websites, if you've used like a kind of Wix or something like that, they'll give you a recommended sort of dimensions for your images for sort of best quality when viewed on the web. So you can just adjust that to match it. If, for example, you're going to be uploading images onto social media, for example, Instagram, you're probably going to want to give yourself a square document. At the moment, our dimensions are constrained to whatever ratio our document is currently set at. So if I change my width, it will automatically update my height. Yeah, so you can see that here. If you want to switch that off, you just click this Pro button, and that will unconstrain the ratio of our document size, and then we can manually edit both those dimensions without them affecting each other, okay? So that's a really good way to be able to get a different sort of crop to what your current ratio is set at. When you're happy with your dimensions, you then hit resize. You'll get a little error message or warning message. You just say yes. And that will have then adjusted our document size to meet our new sort of specifications. What is happening now is that we've gone into a kind of weird sort of 2D preview mode. So to fix that, we're just going to drag on our screen to bring our subtools in. We're then going to press Control N to clear away anything that shouldn't be there. And then we're going to click Edit to go back into edit mode. Okay, and then I can hit my frame button to zoom out. Now if I zoom in and out, I'm going to be seeing my full kind of bounding box size. And again, if I zoom here, I'm changing my view. Okay, now if it seems like your subtool now has a kind of grainy outline, that's because we're a little bit zoomed out from our document. So if we hit Actual, we're then zoomed in to the specific size of our working space, okay? But we're losing a little bit around the edge because our resolution is higher than our kind of preview space. So again, you can kind of adjust out using our zoom buttons, okay? So the next thing you're going to want to do is to apply some different materials to our subtools. So I'm just going to go up to the main body of the demo soldier and select that. Now if I come over to my material selector over here and click it, it will launch that menu, and I've got all sorts of different materials that I can choose from to apply to my different subtools. And if you hover, it will give you a preview of how that material will look. So for example, for the body, I'm going to use Polyskin. So I click that and it applies it to my model. Now at the moment, it's kind of previewing that across all of my subtools, but it's not actually fixing the material to any subtool at this stage. In order to apply that material to your subtool, you're going to select the M on your material channel. You're then going to go to Color, and you're going to say Fill Object. When you do that, a little paintbrush will appear on whatever subtool you have selected, and that indicates that there's now a material and a color applied to that particular subtool. So then you move down to your next one, for example, the shirt, go back into our material picker, select a different material, and then we're going to say color fill object. Now that's applied that to our t-shirt. We'll then go to our next subtool, pick a different material, color fill object, and we're just going to carry on all the way down our subtools, picking the different materials that we want for each. Just pick whichever you think kind of looks good, and you can always change it a little bit later on as well. I'm not going to do all of these, it's just going to be like repeating the same process, but you should do it for each of your different subtool layers. And another thing you can adjust is also the colour of your material. So if we pick, I don't know, skin shade, and then go into our colour picker and select a colour, hopefully it will fill that subtool with that material with a colour applied as well. Okay, so you're just going to go through all your subtools and pick your materials. If you are adjusting colours, you might also want to make sure you have material RGB channel selected, and that makes sure that you've also applied not only the colour, not only the material, but also the colour to your model. If you've been using poly paint or anything like that, You don't want to select this because it will overwrite your polypaint settings. So instead, you'll just have materials selected, okay? So let's just change the color of those boots. So again, material, let's go for this one, and color, and fill object. Okay, so once you're happy with your different material selections, we're now going to think a little bit about the lighting of our scenes. So to adjust the lighting, we go into the light menu, which is found up here. And what I find useful to do at this point is to dock that light menu into my workspace. So rather than having to keep opening it up in the toolbar, I just have it docked to the side over here. We can control our light sources by pressing the kind of light bulb icon, and that will switch our light sources on and off, so you can have multiple light sources in your scene. Okay, you can see this light source has a color which is blue, which is why this blue hue has appeared. You can always adjust the color of your light source if you want to. You can also reposition the position of your light source. So this little orange dot, if you drag it, it's going to reposition where your light source is in the scene. You can also adjust the intensity of your light, the distance from your main object. There's lots of different menus within the light settings you can have a play around with. I'm not going to go too deep into that right now, but just to let you know where that light menu is, how you switch your sources on and off, and just letting you know that you can change the color and the intensity. One thing you might want to adjust is the light type. So you can have sun or radio or glow light. That's another thing that you might want to have a bit of a play around with. Once you're happy with your light, if you hit this preview button, it's going to get us a bit of a cleaner image and give us a bit of a better idea of how our export is going to look. We can see here it's kind of cleaned up a bit. If you're still finding that you have some jagged edges, just make sure you have actual selected, and that's zooming us in to the proper size. So if you're having jagged edges when you preview, just click actual and you're going to zoom in, and then when you hit BPR, you're going to get a nice clean preview. Now we can see here that we have shadows on our render. We can see here that our object is actually casting a shadow behind itself. If you don't want it to have a ground shadow, you can just switch off this floor button, and it's gonna, when you press render again, it's gonna render it without a floor shadow. So that's something that you can switch on or off. And the idea of what you want to do at this point is just to be getting your scene looking good. So at the moment, for example, I have perspective turned on. If I switch that off, I'm going to have a proper sort of front view of my design. If we want to change our camera angle, what I generally do is zoom out a little bit to get my whole bounding box. And then I'm going to be using move, rotate and zoom on these icons to kind of reposition my character. If I'm dragging around and I press shift, it will lock to a particular angle, which can be useful. And again, just hit that BPR button to get a preview of how your design is looking. Depending on how many subtools you have, your rendering can take a couple of minutes. So yeah, just be aware of that. Okay, so what you want to do basically is just get whatever camera angles and whatever view you want to have of your design. Decide if you want to have the ground shadows, and decide if you want to be in perspective or straight on mode. Okay, once you're happy with the positioning of your scene and your lighting, rather than doing a quick preview render, you can go to your render menu, which is here, and you can change it to best. Now, best render mode will take a little longer, but it's going to give you a much clearer and more detailed render. Again, if you're having slightly fuzzy lines, make sure you're in actual zoom mode, and yeah, perform your best render. So let's just switch that on, and again, it's going to take a moment or so to do that. Okay, let's just click that on again. Okay, great. Once we're happy with our scene and how it's looking, we're now ready to export. So to do that, you go to Document, and you have this export button here. Now, something that you must remember is if you have a large document size, so say you've set it pretty large, and if you're zoomed out to be able to view your entire document size, if you then export, it's not going to do it at this dimension. It's going to export it at whatever size you're zoomed out at. So in order to achieve an export of this size, your sort of predetermined document size, make sure you are zoomed into actual size at the point when you export. If you're zoomed out, it's going to make it smaller. So have actual selected, document, export, and you get a couple of different export formats. If you select PSD, you're going to get a nice Photoshop format that you can open in Photoshop to do further manipulations. If you select JPEG, it's actually going to open a second menu. And in this menu, you can actually do further modifications to your document before you export it. So for example, you can do more kind of cropping. You can also adjust your quality to bring down your file size. For example, if you're going to be making an image you're going to use as a thumbnail. You can also switch on this adjust menu, and you can also play around with more settings in your kind of colors and contrast and all that kind of stuff. Once you're happy with your settings, you just press OK, and it will export in JPEG resolution. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.